Well, hi everyone, and welcome to You Are My Boro with myself, Scott Wilson, and Dom Shaw from the Northern Echo. The season might be over, but the Boro news rolls on. We've got a few things in the pipeline. We're going to have a quick wrap up of the season that was in this vid. Then at the end of this week, we'll do another vid, kind of looking ahead to the summer and transfers. And who might go, who might leave, what Boro need, all that kind of stuff. And then at the start of next week, we'll do a live question and answer video where hopefully we'll get some questions in from yourselves, some things you want us to talk about, and we'll have a chat about that. But for now, as I say, we're going to have a look back at the season that finished last weekend. Quick bit of housekeeping. If you're watching on YouTube, then please subscribe, leave us a comment, give us a like. And if you're listening on one of the various podcast platforms, rate and review. It does help us in terms of getting the message out there. So, Dom, season over. You were there at the weekend. I mean, let's start with the kind of wider reflection. So, how would you sum up Middlesbrough 2023-2024?
Well, I think I was reading your piece, your end of season review, and I think you said in it that there's been four distinct quarters, really, hasn't there? Yeah. And you can the nightmare start, the kind of spirited fight back, then kind of Carabao Cup, the fall off after that, and then the spirited and encouraging finish again. At the start of the season, clearly the hope and the aim would have been top six, but I do think all things considered, the start, the injuries, the players they lost last year. I do think Boro were in a unique situation 12 months ago, which no doubt we'll talk about. I think there's more positives, certainly more positives than negatives to come out of the season. And I do think for probably more clear than what has been in a number of years, really. You're finishing the season with a bit more clarity of what the summer holds and real hope and expectation for next season, when Michael Carrick made absolutely clear after the game on Saturday, we want to win promotion. I'm not shying away from that. We want to go up next year. I think everyone connected with the club feels like they're in a really good place going into summer.
So let's very quickly then spin through those kind of four sections. So if we look at section one of the season, which as you said would be from the opening day probably to that first win against Southampton. And you kind of forget now, but just how kind of worrying that period was, because after that Sheff Wed game, where Boro were bottom of the league, hadn't won a game, a whole load of signings that we didn't really know an awful lot about. A few didn't seem to be settling all that well. And it was a really difficult period. So I guess, credit to Michael Carrick for the way he handled that. Credit to the club for coming through that. But probably a lesson of how not to do a kind of transfer window and a situation you get yourself into at the end of last season, where you basically got to sign an entire new team and just chuck them together and hope it works.
Carrick said after the game on Saturday that he told the players after the West Brom defeat at the end of August that if he could, he'd have a bet on them to make the top six. Now, if he'd have said that at the time, I think we're going to make the top six this year, we'd have come together on this video a couple of days after and said like that's delusional. At that time, I remember that West Brom defeat, 4-2 flattered Boro. It was chaotic and worrying. But then that Sheffield Wednesday game, I remember being at Hillsborough at half time, and how often did we talk about it on here that Carrick wasn't changing? He wasn't changing what he was saying. I remember being at Hillsborough at half-time and thinking, if this doesn't get any better, there's got to be a different message. He can't defend that. In the second half, they improved the week after they beat Southampton, and there they were. I think you mentioned there Carrick deserves credit. I think Carrick deserves real credit for like clearly getting Boro to the Carabao Cup semi-finals, guiding them to an 8th place finish after all it's been through. But two spells in particular, I think that first spell, and then what happened after Stoke, because again, after Stoke, we were asking Carrick, are you in danger of being sucked in here? They looked like they were, didn't they? Yeah. They were playing like they were. At that stage, if you'd have said they're going to lose one of the last 12 and finish just 4 points outside the top six, again, it would have been out there, to say the least, wouldn't it? I think Carrick deserves immense credit for both of those, really. They're the strings to his bow, aren't they?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, they are. And like you say, we've said it on previous vids. I think probably the most impressive thing is the way that he did stick to his principles. He stayed incredibly level-headed. There was a lot of talk, a lot of angst kind of going on around, but Carrick didn't let himself get drawn in that. You mentioned the Southampton game there. I think of all the one-off games during the season, that game was probably the most important. And I remember back to it that for probably the first half hour of that game, Southampton were the better side. It looked like Boro were going to be up against it. And then they gradually got back into it. And then in the second half, Southampton just seemed to retreat into their shell. Boro poured it on, obviously got the win. And then we went from there. That second chunk then from Southampton probably through to getting on towards kind of late November, early December when Boro went on that really, really good winning run. I think what's interesting when you look back on it now is that the team that put the bulk of that run together is actually markedly different to the team that's had this run at the end of the season. So, just pick a game, for example. Let's go with the 4-0 at Sunderland, which would seem like a good game. Paddy McNair played, barely kicked a ball in the second half of the season. Dale Fry played, barely kicked a ball in the second half of the season. Hayden Hackney played, injured most of the second half of the season. Barlaser played, ended up out the team. Matt Crooks played, was sold. Izzy Jones played, fair enough, he was there. Josh Coburn barely kicked a ball in the second half of the season. Tommy Smith didn't kick a ball in the second half of the season. Sam Greenwood dropped out with the team in the second half of the season. So I think it's interesting that actually we talk about various chunks of the season. There's actually been various Boro teams at various stages of this season as well.
There has, which leads us into the injury. Leads us into the injury situation, really, doesn't it? Because it's been pretty unprecedented. Now, I say that Newcastle fans up the road would probably say that they've been in a similar position, and Carrick says all the time, doesn't he? Teams get injuries, so I don't want to use that as an excuse. But Boro have been stretched to the limit at times this season, and you think of the major players who've not really played that much football. Marcus Forss, Riley McGree, Hayden Hackney, Dale Fry, Tommy Smith was a key player last season. Josh Coburn didn't kick a ball for the second half of the season. You could go on and on, really. And because of that, I think there are various questions that haven't been answered. So one, for example, who everyone's fit. Who does he play on the right? Jones or Forss? Everyone's fit in midfield. What's his first choice go-to pairing? Housen and Hackney every day of the week, you'd think, but we don't know because O'Brien, the injury that he had, and we probably haven't seen the best of him. It feels like it feels like there's kind of a lot of unanswered questions, probably exciting unanswered questions. And then the other thing, just going on the second half of the season, Morgan Rogers, like if you'd have said early in the season that when he couldn't get a game for Boro, and he didn't have a clear position. He's going to go to Villa and he's going to end up one of the standout Premier League players in the second half of the season. That feels to me like a deal. And I know we're going to talk transfers at the end of the week, so we'll go into that then. That's increasingly looking like a deal that's suited everyone, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And just following on from what you say there, I think we talk about the injuries, and that probably leads us into chunk 3 of the season where the injuries really did bite. But I think what's interesting is arguably the 4 best players in the last month and a half of the season: Matt Clark, Luke Ayling, Lewis O'Brien, Emmanuel Latalath. There's a very, very strong argument that none of those 4 are anywhere near Boro's starting lineup if everybody had stayed fit. In that chunk of the season. I mean, Ayling probably wouldn't have even been signed, but Clark, Latalath and O'Brien almost certainly wouldn't have been in that side if Boro hadn't had the injuries of those players that we listed that were playing in the first half of the season.
And that Carrick he talks about it a lot with young lads, doesn't he? But it stands for everyone. Where be ready, because when your chance comes, you've got to take it. And now we're sat here, and if we were to predict the first starting 11 of next season, regardless of who comes in, you'd think, well, Ayling's going to be in it. Latalath's going to be leading the line. And it'd be incredibly harsh on Matt Clark if he wasn't in it. Lewis O'Brien's obviously different because the transfer uncertainty there. But those three, Clark's an interesting one again, isn't it? Because if ever, Darragh Lenihan, we haven't mentioned Lenihan. When Lenihan's fit, Vandenberg's been immense. Dale Fry to come back.
Dale Fry, yeah.
Paddy McNair's going, but you've got 4 real top centre half options there now, haven't you? Come pre-season and the start of next season, bear in mind that there's clearly areas going to be strengthened as well. As everyone's fit, there's going to be some fascinating team selection dilemmas. The type of dilemmas managers love to have, the type of headaches managers love to have.
There we go. Football cliche time, can't beat it.
The third chunk, before we go in the last chunk, and then we'll come back to the Carabao Cup game. You were there. The Norwich game and Borja Sainz's red card, huge moment in the season.
Yeah, massive. Yeah, it was. It was another really, really big kind of turning point moment, wasn't it? That third chunk of the season, if we talk about it from kind of early December through or probably mid-February, that's when Borough's form did become a lot more inconsistent. It obviously contained the 2 Chelsea games, which were, arguably the biggest high and arguably the biggest low of the entire season within a fortnight. But I do think that's the time when the injuries, Carrick found it difficult to deal with that, and largely because every week there seemed to be a new one. So it wasn't just that he was having to change the team. It was that he was having to change his change team, if you know what I mean. There really just was no consistency whatsoever. And I think Boro did pay a price from that. We've skirted around it a bit there. The Carabao Cup run was obviously a massive, massive part of this season. Those 2 Chelsea games, you cannot get more contrast and kind of emotions and matches, can you?
Because I genuinely headed down there thinking Boro had a real chance.
Chelsea were really wobbling, weren't they?
Yeah, because when you think of that Carabao Cup run, like clearly the Chelsea games come to mind. But when you think back to the start of the season, those wins against Huddersfield and Bolton at a time when Boro could not get a win in the league were huge, really, weren't they? And I think that run was massive for players like Morgan Rogers. That's when he got his football. It gave Carrick a chance to get Latte
as well, really, because he tended in the first half of the season to be playing in the Carabao Cup, and it was Coburn more in the league, wasn't it?
Yeah, Vandenberg against Huddersfield, Silvera football, Tom Glover, who would obviously have a prolonged spell in the team.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, if you go 7 games without a win, confidence is bound to take a hit. I just think the importance of those wins, Carrick's in the dressing room every week telling him, don't worry, it's going to turn. But it's human nature if you're a player to doubt that, isn't it? Is it? We're not getting results. We're not playing well, although Carrick thought they were. I just thought those cup wins kind of backed up what the manager was saying. And then, it's football, all about memories, isn't it? So when you think back to standout Riverside moments of the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years, that Chelsea win now goes right in there, doesn't it? Hackney scoring, hometown boy, against the billionaires of Chelsea. Yeah, it was a great night, and I did fancy Boro going down there quickly because it was fun.
It didn't last long, did it?
We say the one thing that won't happen is Chelsea won't be through the corner and up after.
Yeah,
and then we sat there.
Goodness me, that was a. I can't remember which. The goals have kind of blurred into one, but the one where Barlaza just kind of presents them it on a plate and they waltz through, and it was like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? But anyway,
and that the last chunk then. And
before we get to that last chunk, that third chunk that I've touched on there obviously encompassed the January window, and not for the first time, a pretty important window, I think, for Boro. It had been the season before, obviously with Archer and Ramsey coming in. I don't think it was transformative to that extent this time round. It clearly wasn't. But in Luke Ayling and Finn Azaz in particular, Boro brought in 2 players who would go on to have a massive say in the second half of the season, and you suspect will probably be big players next season as well. Obviously, Ayling yet to be properly confirmed, but seems very much like it's on the way.
I think there's a couple of things when you look back to the January window. Firstly, we've touched on this, haven't we, a lot? I think Boro deserve real credit for showing their flexibility. So Luke Ayling, 32-year-old right back, doesn't necessarily tick the recruitment boxes of the type of player Boro were bringing in last summer: Morgan Rogers, Emmanuel Artilath, Raab Vandenberg, and those types. But clearly Boro realised that they needed a quick fix in that position. And Ayling was exactly that. And he's come in and he's if you were going for the player of the season purely on the second half of the season, Emmanuel Artilath's probably going to win it. But Matt Clark and Luke Ayling would be right up there, wouldn't they? And Boro have to sign him, don't they? On the form of the last 6 months, they had to at least make an effort to sign him. So I think there was the balance between that. Then moving on a player like Finn Azazu, that kind of courted for 6 months or so, realised that now was a chance to get him a move. But I think when you look at Hull and Liam Rossinia's exit this week, the stark difference in that Boro stuck to their plan in the January window. They didn't think, let's have a right go now and see if we can make the top 6. Like Hull did, the money Hull were throwing around in January was eye-watering. And we know it because a couple of players they signed were players Boro were interested in. And they absolutely blew other teams in the Championship out of the water in the Championship in the January window. Now, this isn't a case of being wise after the event, but I remember thinking in January, like, what happens if they don't go up? Is the owner just going to accept that? Now, clearly, Liam Rossinia's sacking comes as a shock, but still, when you throw that sort of money at it in January, clearly whoever gets that job this summer knows that they're going to have to go up next year, or they're going to be out. I think Boro held their nerve in January, because you look back at the January window, even if they got in the top 6, the teams at the time looked so strong. Leeds, Southampton, Ipswich, whoever weren't going to make it. We felt that, we said at the time, didn't we, on numerous occasions, it felt wiser for Boro to stick to their longer term plan, and I think with time that's been proven to be the case.
No, I agree. I guess devil's advocate slightly, Ipswich signing Kiefer Moore probably made the difference to get them over the line. I think, you can do it, but you're right. But Boro, Ipswich were there all the way through, weren't they? Boro were always going to have to play an awful lot of catch up. And obviously in the end, it didn't happen. But to be fair to them, and let's move to kind of chunk 4 of the season, they got an awful lot closer than I think either of us realistically thought was anywhere near on the card. Because as you rightly say, after that Stoke defeat in, let's have a look, right at the start of March, Boro dropped to 14th after that game. Now, they never quite were fully in the relegation picture, but they were only another couple of defeats away from being in there. Had they not beaten Norwich at home, as you touched on it, and had they not then followed that up with a pretty impressive win down at QPR, they could have been sucked in.
Undoubtedly, that felt like a very real possibility. I never ever thought Boro were going to go down. I never thought Boro were in danger of going down, but I did think they were in danger of being sucked into that. And you only have to look at the form of the teams at the bottom in the last few weeks. Look at Sunderland. If the season had gone on a month longer, Sunderland would have undoubtedly been in a relegation.
And Boro could have had the final 2 months of the season that Sunderland had had. To all intents and purposes, didn't really have anything to play for. A whole host of injuries, players out. It would have been pretty easy for this Boro squad to have downed tools in the way that Sunderland as a collective undoubtedly did in the last couple of months of the season. But to their credit, they finished 4 points off the playoffs, whereas Sunderland finished 4 points off the bottom 3. That's the difference between those two clubs' end. And it just feels like, as we've said a number of times, what it's done is it's created a real positivity, sense of momentum for the future, and shown the strengths that Boro can hopefully build on that are already there now within this squad.
Yeah, like we're bound to sit here and say, bloody Rotherham, how do you get 1 point out of 6 against Rotherham, Sheffield away? But other clubs will have that. And on the flip side, 6 points out of Leicester, 4 points out of Southampton. It kind of works both ways, I guess, doesn't it?
I think, sorry, just 2 from 21 in the first 7 games.
That's what.
I mean, that, we can talk about Rotherham, we can talk about this, we can talk, but if Boro had even won 3 of those first 7, even if they took 5 points, but in the end, I think they were just playing catch up too much.
Yeah,
and I know they just about got themselves there, but they never quite got themselves there, did they? They were never able to actually breach that gap.
It always felt like a long shot, and even in the last few weeks, despite our best efforts to build up Boro's hopes, it never felt like a top 6 finish was a probability, did it? It always felt like a possibility.
But they were always relying on other clubs to go on what would have been pretty dreadful runs, and other clubs had wobbles, but they didn't go on the kind of run that Boro would have needed to give them a genuine shot of getting in there.
No, but what we said a couple of months ago was when after that Stoke game, after that Norwich game even, what you want to do is go into the summer with something to cling to, go into the summer with momentum and positivity and confidence. And that's undoubtedly what they've done. So
let's have a very, very quick rattle through to wrap up then. Player of the year, I think we touched on this in the last vid, but go on.
Rav, for me, Vandenberg, followed by Clark. How about you?
Howson, followed by Vandenberg.
Goal of the season, hard to argue a Greenwood's Leicester goal.
I was just going to say Greenwood Leicester. I think it's hard to see past it, isn't it, as a one-off goal. Moment of the season, Hackney Chelsea.
Disappointment of the season.
Okay, so you can pick out moments, you can pick out an odd game, whatever. For me, I think the biggest disappointment of the season is that Josh Coburn hasn't been able to stay fit, because I think this would have been his real chance to make a breakthrough. I worry now that Boro are going to bring players in the summer. At the start of next season, Josh could be number 3, number 4 in the pecking order. He's back to being right on the fringe of it. If he's not playing in the first half of the season, he could be loaned out in January. Goodness knows. Listen, he might come and really make it, but I just worry that by not having the opportunity to make a kind of real statement this season, his chance might have gone, and that would be really harsh and really unfortunate, I think.
Yeah, when you look at, I think it was Plymouth away when he was rounding into real form, and at that stage, there's no doubt about it, he was first choice number 9. Yeah. I think the positive is Carrick's made clear in the last couple of weeks he's fully fit now, or he'll be fully fit for the start of pre-season. He'll be desperate, won't he, to stake a claim and to show that he should still be around next season. And Carrick will undoubtedly give him his chance, even though you're looking and thinking they're going to bring another centre forward in. I think the other disappointment of the season, Sam Greenwood, after such a promising start.
Looked so good, didn't he, in that kind of month or so around that Sunderland game?
Yeah, he did. He did peter out in the second half of the season. We'll be back at the back end of the week. We'll do a look ahead to the summer transfer window. So if there's anything you want us to discuss on that, just give us a shout before then. And then next week, we'll confirm exactly when we do our second vid pod at the end of the week. We'll do a live Q&A. It'll be one night next week. So do get your questions or issues in you want discussing. As Scott said at the top, do subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on your podcast channels, then rate and review. And we'll be back later this week to look ahead to the summer transfer window. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.